Hi, this is Curt Robbins from Higher Learning LV, and welcome to Curt's Cannabis Corner, a video series where we discuss text articles that we publish on a weekly basis. And this week, I'm really excited to have some smart people in the room, and we're discussing Delta-8 THC. So welcome to Dr. Ben Caplan from Boston, Alaina Dorsey from Baltimore, and of course, David Rheins from MJBA.
Hey, Curt.
Hey, welcome.
Hello.
Thanks for showing up, everybody. So let's start talking about Delta-8, lovers and haters. First, let's define Delta-8. And I'm going to ask Dr. Caplan to do that.
So basically, terpenes are compounds that have lots of carbons, more than 4 or 5. And when you have terpenes in a circle, you call it a cyclic terpene. When you have 3 of those, you have tricyclic terpenes. And Delta-8 is a tricyclic terpenoid. It looks like a terpene. THC that we all know and love is a tricyclic terpenoid. And it in the
Delta-9 variety.
The Delta-9 that we all know and love. Inside that molecule, one of these spots has what's called a double bond. There's just a very strong connection between 2 carbon molecules. In Delta-8 THC, that double bond is just at a neighboring spot. It's the same stuff, the same makeup, just has a double bond between 2 different carbon molecules. And that slight difference gives Delta-8 completely different properties.
All of us, I think, in this room have used Delta-8 products. Dave, you've used Delta-8, right?
I have, but I must say that I, prefer the traditional Delta-9 cousin.
You're a Delta-9 guy. Okay. Alaina, I know you talked in a previous recording about transitioning from Delta-9 to Delta-8.
2 years ago now, I went through a very stressful situation, and I'm a medical patient in Maryland. I ramped up my Delta-9 consumption so much that it just kind of threw everything, like my entire body off for the past year and a half. So I've had to take 30-day breaks. And I'd come back to it and it still would mess with me. But I finally tried it out. Delta-9 at this point, because when I first started as a patient, I was microdosing it. So it's I got the high, but I was using it spiritually too, and digging through, going through my anxiety and depression and things like that. But it started just turning into kind of like a tranquilizer where I would just be out. I randomly went to a CBD shop around here, and it was a hemp pre-roll that was sprayed with the Delta-8. I smoked it and went about my day, and I'm just yo, this feels like the first time I ever smoked. I feel good. I feel good. I don't feel slowed down. I don't feel overwhelmed with thought. The Delta-9 was also kind of messing with my stomach and my appetite and my ability to eat. Once I started consuming the Delta-8, my appetite came back. It wasn't like the munchies appetite. It was just a genuine, actual appetite. I think this is great. And then I get on the internet and the cannabis community calls it a polished turd, and people are losing their minds over it.
Probably should discuss efficacy a little here, since you're, wonderful segue into that topic, Alaina. Now, research has shown that Delta-8 provides roughly 2/3 of the psychoactivity of Delta-9. So that's significant for folks suffering anxiety, because you're trying to reduce anxiety, not increase it.
For different people, they're going to have different results. Delta-8 binds to places in our brains differently than Delta-9. And also, obviously, in your sort of GI tract, which is why you might have different stomach sort of upset or not. Psychoactivity is different. That's been studied, in bench science and with animal studies, and certainly with anecdotal reports from humans. The differences in psychoactivity are debatable, and I think that's probably why people might call it a polished turd. If it's offering less psychoactivity than what people are used to, they're going to think, wait a minute, this is an imposter. This is not quite the real thing. This is a totally natural molecule. Every cannabis plant produces this. Every cannabis consumption experience that's heated also contains some small amounts of Delta-8.
First, to start to talk to Alaina's concern about Delta-9, I would question how you were consuming that cannabis what cannabis you were consuming and why you identified the THC molecule as being particularly offensive. It's really more complicated than a single molecule. That what we're talking about is the endocannabinoid system. Everybody's is different, and depending on your needs, you're going to absorb and respond to cannabinoids differently. Now, you're a medical patient in Maryland, but Maryland's pretty nascent in what's available to patients.
That with anything you consume, I believe there is the possibility that for some people you can consume too much Delta-9. And I believe that is what happened with me. Curt had mentioned in the article about being able to take a Delta-9 break, of me being able to take an extended break instead of like a week or a month.
Yeah, I'd like to ask Dr. Caplan about tolerance breaks. Yeah, we did talk about that in the article, because there's some folks, I got some samples from a company called Leafwise. They had some very high quality samples. They're 510 carts. The folks at Leafwise were saying that some of their customers and patients were having great success, in their opinion, with Delta-9 tolerance breaks using Delta-8. What do you think about that, Dr. Caplan?
Tolerance is a problem for a lot of people that are consuming a high
It's
amount,
an expensive product.
regular amounts of cannabis. Yeah, there are a lot of things which can impact and interfere with tolerance. Breaks is probably the most well known there. But the receptors in your brain are seeing the same signal over and over and over, and are just saying, "Yeah, no thanks." And they actually take away the receptors because of that double bond I was talking about. That difference between Delta-8 and Delta-9. The signal that's coming to the receptors from THC, whether it's Delta-8 or Delta-9, is changing. And that subtle difference means the receptor's not going to ignore this signal. Very much tied to what people in the cannabis community all refer to as this entourage effect. That it's not necessarily you need everybody at the party to be in the room. Sometimes you just need something that's just not the same person over and over and over.
And that explains what Alaina was saying in her experience with Delta-9 and Delta-8. It's hard. This is complicated biochemistry, right? And bioscience. And it's tough to get down to the reality, especially with all the marketing hyperbole. And we see that on social media every day.
Dr. Caplan, is it your recommendation then that those of us who are habitual cannabis consumers, that we build in periods of breaks? Is there benefit in that? Do you recommend that as a therapeutic?
So, I mean, my take is there are two sides to the sword, and some people can see tolerance as a problem, but actually it's quite an asset for other people. I don't generally recommend people take tolerance breaks unless they're concerned about the money that they're spending on cannabis. But I have a lot of patients who consume very high levels to try to achieve effects with respect to tumor growth and cancer. And for those people, being high is an annoyance. They don't want to feel the psychological effects of cannabis. And having a tolerance is a wonderful reprieve for them.
That's an excellent statement, because we tend to always frame tolerance in a negative way.
I mean, there's the psychological and there's the physical. Runners get addicted to the runner's high. And if they don't get out and run for a couple of days in a row, they get cranky. I think a lot of pot smokers are like that. We may not be having physical withdrawals, but we're not quite as amusing in the morning if we we don't get our coffee and cannabis.
Coffee and sativa.
It's interesting, Curt. Yeah, caffeine is on the list of 13 or 14 items that helps with tolerance. I hear where you're coming from, and there are certainly things.
Oh, interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah. So high doses of caffeine can flush out your cannabinoids, which brings up an interesting irony for the candies and nutraceuticals out there that combine infused chocolate covered espresso beans or something. It's sort of a catch-22.
The real catch-22 is any of these quote unquote medical products that are sugar based. It's ridiculous. Good poison, but it's poison nonetheless.
Poison. It's tasty. I want some more Oreos. I want to talk about one more topic before we close. Synthetic molecules, in this case Delta-8, versus a natural, organic, nature form, the Delta-8 molecule. As a technical writer, and a science communicator, I tend to think the molecule is the molecule is a molecule. It wouldn't be itself if it didn't have that molecular structure and those characteristics, like we're talking about the carbon atoms and the double bond placement. This criticism of synthetic molecules, demonizing them simply because they're synthetic. What's going on there?
The term synthetic has been poisoned, and that's partly because of K2 and spice and these products that were coming overseas and killing people. We don't want to kill people, so we are concerned about synthetics that we hear about in the news. That's very different than a machine-produced product, which you can call also synthetic. So we have a difficulty with language. The concern that David brought up earlier, which was single molecules versus many diverse molecules, is a different story. The question about synthetic production is something produced by a machine harmful or not harmful? And I think we can't say with broad brush that all machine-produced molecules are bad.
That's right. There's a couple of ways to look at it. You started with the chemistry that a molecule is a molecule. There's also sort of the philosophical that it is only ego that suggests that man could divert from the natural, that anything we do is not natural. That presupposes that we are somehow above and beyond the natural universe, and that we're creating things that have not existed before, which again is pretty egocentric way of looking at the universe. I'm going to suggest that processing, which is just another way of looking at synthetics, is historically inefficient and historically less beneficial than what we find in nature. Not that it's less natural necessarily, but that it's less pristine. So in the production, anytime we touch something, the more we touch it, the less efficacious or the less sustainable it is. I think the body is evolved to consume plants much more efficiently than we do artificial chemicals.
Like, again, with my experiences and some other people's experiences, cannabis was great until it wasn't. And I still like to consume, and genuinely, I like to get high, but I also like exploring these deeper roots of why I have anxiety, why I have depression. I feel like some people do use cannabis as not really getting to the root of their anxiety and their depression, because it doesn't just appear out of nowhere. Again, it's a salve of, well, this helps me get through the day, but it's just like, okay, are you doing the deep work to really address what's actually going on?
Right.
And
sometimes they're escape artists, unfortunately. Yes.
Yeah, it's just like, I feel, at least my experiences being a moderator in a cannabis community online and being in this industry, there's this cannabis it's everything. It's like, no,
the panacea, right?
Nothing on this earth is the only thing that anybody can have. Like David, you weren't really feeling Delta-8, but you still have success with Delta-9, and you're a habitual user, but you're not having bad effects. It's different because, again, when it comes to cannabis, everybody's body is different.
That what you're talking about is a holistic health scenario, and one that's a journey. Right. And so, like anything else, what was good for us in our 20s may not be good for us in our 30s or at a certain period of time of high stress. But you mentioned cannabis doctors, and since we have a doctor online, I'll suggest that part of the problem is that mainstream healthcare does not recognize the efficacy of cannabis. And if I go to my doctor and he says, well, what's wrong? And, what drugs do you take? And I say, I don't take any pharmaceuticals. And he says, well, what do you do? And I say, I consume cannabis. They write it in the file with a big cannabis user. And well, if it works for you, I guess that's okay. We don't have any studies, and there's no support. There's no integration into my traditional healthcare. There's like, okay, well, we're going to give you colchicine and prednisone for your gout, and call me in 2 weeks.
Walking the AMA line sometimes, yeah.
So I think that's part of the problem, is that we can't talk about our cannabis consumption, let alone the subtleties of Delta-8, 9, or 10 consumption to our medical healthcare providers. And traditional healthcare, and I don't mean to be offensive, doctor, but is driven by big pharma. FDA is run by big pharma. They create our policy, and our healthcare is all in line. So that's what I'm suggesting is we've always been an alternative medicine. We've always been, folk medicine, if you will, because we weren't available. It wasn't available through our doctors. You couldn't go to the pharmacy. It was like don't ask, don't tell, right? They'd rather you not even talk about it.
True. All right. I want to do a quick go round, give viewers a wrap up on Delta-8, because somebody comes in here and says, what the heck is Delta-8? They watch this video. What's their takeaway?
So Delta-8 is one of the pharmacy. Cannabis is a natural pharmacy, has lots of components. The two most well-bred and most popular are THC and CBD, but Delta-8, I would say, is the twin cousin of Delta-9. It's not quite a twin brother or sister, but it's very close. A little bit less euphoric, a little bit less intoxicating. Some people describe it as more, I hate to use the term, is indica-ish, meaning less creative, less sort of stimulating, a little bit more calming, quieting than Delta-9. But the truth is we're still learning. People should also be wary that the sources they might have online are mostly getting FDA letters to shut down. And the industry, Delta-8 industry is going to be regulated.
Dave, what do you think about Delta-8? What's your takeaway for viewers?
Well, I think Delta-8 is Delta-9 for people who aren't in legal states for the most part. I think it is a hot trend, single molecule that is a fad, and that ultimately we will see this marketplace evolve into more full plant extract products as legalization and normalization demonize THC.
Destigmatize. Alaina,
Destigmatize.
what would you give viewers? Because you have a lot than the average human being in America. You have a lot more experience with Delta-8 than most people.
Yeah, if you're not having a good experience with Delta-9.
Right. More tools in the toolbox, right?
Like I'd read an article that suggested like there are children who are patients. There are elderly people who are cannabis patients, and Delta-9 is just too intense. It's something that is worth exploring. I feel like it does have staying power in the industry, give or take how it's regulated.
And we have lots of terpenes and flavonoids and cannabinoids from this plant we call hemp. And often they help us. They don't help everybody. I'm glad we talked about subjective efficacy today, because that is true. Just because it helps your neighbor or your friend at choir doesn't mean it's going to help you.
Can I throw a plug in for people that are interested in learning more about Delta-8 THC? PubMed is a national US resource that has about 300 papers about Delta-8 THC. And
it's really about getting educated and getting beyond the hyperbole and the marketing that we were talking about earlier, getting down to the hard science. It's detailed, it's complicated, and it takes some time. Thanks to everybody for showing up. Dr. Ben Caplan from Boston, Mr. David Rheins from Seattle, from the MJBA, and Alaina Dorsey from Baltimore, who gave us some excellent anecdotal information about what it's like to actually use Delta-8 THC versus Delta-9. So thanks again, guys.
Thanks,
Curt.
Curt.
I appreciate the opportunity.